In my 16 years of running at a fairly high level, I read almost every running book I could get my hands on. And despite that, I own very few books on running. And the reason is because most of them you read once and then you donate them or discard them because there isn't a whole lot of value in holding on to them and reading them again. But every once in a while, I find a book that provides so much value to me in trying to improve my running that I hold onto them and kind of hoard them. So today I want to share with you 6 running books that are super valuable, but also just about impossible to find. The first book I'm not going to say too much about because I already have an entire video about this book on my channel, and I'll link to that below. But The Self-Made Olympian by Ron Dawes is absolutely my favorite book on running and one of the best I believe that you can find to help improve your running. Now, I have quite a few copies of this book because Ron Dawes was a local here in Minneapolis and his books sold well, and so I do find them oftentimes at thrift stores or Goodwills, but this is my favorite running book. So if you check Amazon for Self-Made Olympian, there are definitely copies available, but it always tends toward the super pricey side of things. So after I made that video last fall about Ron Dawes' Self-Made Olympian, someone brought to my attention that he actually has a second book, Running Your Best by Ron Dawes, which I don't know how, but I had no idea. So of course then I had to pick up a copy, and I love this book, honestly, just as much as I do his other. This one's a little bit thicker, it's a little bit meatier, and it really goes into a lot of the training, whereas the first book is more kind of a little bit more biographical, but this really goes into the training and whatnot and racing and tactics, and Ron Dawes has just an absolute ton of wisdom to provide and share, and so this was a real treat to read, and I highly recommend it if you can get your hands on it. None available right now on Amazon that I'm seeing. I do, however, see one available on Abe Books. As far as I know, that's the only one out there right now. This next book I actually know of from the Without Limits movie about Prefontaine.
What's going on, Bill?
George Young is in town.
So?
This is an incredibly hard book to find. It took me years of searching to find this. Now, it's an incredible story because George Young was a 4-time Olympian, and it happened pretty much entirely by accident. So it's a super inspiring story. He came from a background of not much success in high school and college, but accidentally ended up in an AAU meet at one point and got second in the 3,000 meter steeplechase and ended up getting invited to these big, Russia versus US meets. And as a result, he ended up just taking off with his career. But it is a super, super motivational story and also gives a ton of details inside like how amateurism was back then, with him accepting payments under the table and whatnot for food and hotel expenses as well as gear and gear endorsements. So it's a really neat inside look of how it was back in the day. So Always Young by Frank Dolson. This one's really tricky. Here's why. There's actually another book that for some reason is conflated with this one on Amazon. So if you click on the copies available, you can see it switches the author's name. It's a totally different book. I'm not sure why that happens, but it is super frustrating. So be super careful if you're trying to acquire this one. This next one, Grete Waitz, World Class, is the only one I have, unfortunately, that was written by a female because for whatever reason, it's kind of hard to find great books by females back, especially in this era. I think just because maybe there weren't many, but this is a phenomenal book. Not sure why it's so hard to find, but an incredible story. The first quarter or so is kind of a biographical tale of her experiences, but then the rest of the book is a very detailed overlook of running, training, and all things running, especially like some of the female aspects, more specific, that you wouldn't see mentioned, dealing with pregnancy and all of those things. She also includes some super, super neat things like some of the recipes that, I mean, classic Norwegian recipes that Greta lived by in her training in her time. So it's super cool just to see those little details of her life and behind the scenes of a just absolutely dominant female marathon from the 70s and 80s. So World Class by Greta Weitz, as far as I know, these are the only 2 copies I see online anywhere for this book, and I honestly don't know how long they're going to be there. Bill Dellinger was the last of the Bills at Oregon. Of course, there was Bill Hayward, Bill Bowerman, and then Bill Dellinger. This book, my college coach actually loaned to me many years ago, back when I was in college running, and Bill Dellinger was a very successful runner himself, but this isn't about that. This is literally about coaching and how to improve with running. And it goes into a lot of heavy training details, a lot of race tactics, how to prepare for races. But also another really cool thing, it has the entire training series from Steve Prefontaine. So that's pretty neat to be able to see the whole thing detailed, spread out. So an interesting look, again, at a very prolific runner who was super influential. There are actually some really cheap ones available right now, which is rare. It's not usually this cheap. No idea why, but there is 2 of them at a really great price. So if you're at all curious about this book, snap that up immediately. And finally, book number 6, Run, Run, Run by Fred Wilt. Fred Wilt was a dominant marathoner in the 40s and mostly 50s, but this is the oldest book on the list here, and it is an absolute treasure. It is, and you can tell just by looking at it. This is an old book. Like, it was not edited. There are type errors, very small font, but a ton of knowledge. The first quarter or so of the book is kind of a little bit biographical about Fred Wilt, and then the rest of it is articles and whatnot on how to train. There was one by Buddy Edelin, who was again a local Minnesota native who was at one point the world's record holder for the marathon. There it is, marathon running, Buddy Allen. But a lot of really great articles, and a lot of this stuff is kind of outdated at this point, but it's still super interesting to see where our fundamentals kind of developed from, because we didn't always have the knowledge and experience that we do today. Run, Run, Run by Fred Wilt. There are a few copies available. If you're willing to pony up the cash, I'd still recommend it if you can. Thanks for watching, guys. If you want to know more about Ron Dawes, his video is right here.